And now is actually a wonderful time to introduce you to our next panelist, who's really going to help you reflect on the art and science of connecting with employers. So time and time again, we hear from students that they aren't really sure of how to pitch their liberal arts and sciences background. So we wanted to make sure that you leave this conference confident in your education. George Anders is Senior Editor at Large at LinkedIn, where he covers the future of work and writes the monthly College to Careers newsletter. He is deeply engaged in developing next generation digital media tools that can make it easier for job seekers to become career ready. He champions ways that technology and the human touch can work in harmony. George is also the author of 5 business books, including his latest, You Can Do Anything, The Surprising Power of Useless Liberal Arts Education. He started his career as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, where he shared in the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting. Over the years, he has been part of core writing teams at Fast Company magazine, Forbes, and Bloomberg View. And his 2003 book about Hewlett-Packard called Perfect Enough was a New York Times bestseller. George majored in economics at Stanford University, graduating with Phi Beta Kappa honors. He is a wonderful friend to the society, and we're absolutely delighted that he's going to share his experience with you today. Thank you so much, George.
Great. Thanks so much for the chance to be part of your afternoon. I'm off in California, so it's still my morning, but we don't have to stress about the time zone. And Nora is going to take us through a slide deck, but I want very much to make this an interactive experience where we've got a lot of opportunity to exchange ideas. That'll probably mean doing it mostly through the chat. So in fact, let me start with just a really simple question that you can just go into the chat. And on a scale of 1 to 5, I'd love to know how you're feeling about the job hunt. And 1 is, I have no idea where I'm even going to start. 5 is, I've got everything totally locked down and I've got, a job coming. And then obviously 2, 3, 4 are the places in between. And there is no wrong answer on this. All answers are right answers. But if you give me a little bit of a sense just by typing in a number, oh, good, we got some decimals too. I like it. Okay, so we're getting a lot of 2s and 3s, and that will help me structure the remarks so that I can help you at the end of this come out feeling that you're on your way to being a 4 and eventually a 5. So that'll be our goal. Thanks for the quick replies. So we can get started on the slides. Next one will show you where we're going. Okay, so I'm going to do 3 things today. I'm going to take you through what employers are all about. And this is, a lot of these are solid points that I would have made a year ago and I'll make a year from now. What skills do they want? What majors do they cherish? And then we'll dig a little deeper. The second and third areas are much more timely because obviously 2020 is taking shape like a year we've never had before. And I want to try and give you as much relevant content as I can. The first will be a look at where we are in the economy, because obviously we've careened around in places I never would have thought we'd be, but here we are. And then the third section will be some very tactical conversation about how to make living in a virtual world work for you. This will probably reinforce some of the things that you heard in your one-on-ones with mentors. And if you hear it twice, that makes it doubly true. If you hear a slightly different variant, consider that as like 2 different ways that you can go. So off we go, and let's get started with employers. Next slide. Okay, so this is a visual way of representing the migration from the informality of college, where you're exchanging ideas, to the business world, where all of a sudden you got to wear different clothes, or at least if we ever get back to offices, that'll be true. But in the end, it's ultimately the same dynamic. Someone's leading the conversation, other people are participating, there's a give and take, there's a flow, there's an ability to sort of marshal consensus, explore ideas, disagree in a way that's both substantive and civil. These are hard skills to learn. College is a great place to learn them, and you can make a multi-decade career putting them to work. So at that conceptual level, you're perfectly prepared for great careers. There are some speed bumps along the way. So let's go to the next slide. Again, reinforcing what are the things you get out of a strong liberal arts education. You get leadership, you get communication, you get collaboration, you get time management. These are all top 4 skills in what employers say they want. The catch here is these are the people who are seasoned in the workforce, who are managing people who've been out of college for 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. The hard thing is you've got to work your way through the people who do the hiring. And the people who do the hiring tend to be more mechanical, as we'll see on the next slide. Okay, so if we look at what majors show up in job ads, it's shockingly narrow. Computer science, accounting, engineering are the big ones. When employers ask for people with a specific major, they've got a specific job in mind, generally with technical skills, generally something that is in the land of STEM. And that's the one place where you get big bonus points for your specific major. Handful of business majors are relevant too. I put marketing on the list. I could have put finance as well. And then we get to the majors that we know and love, and hardly anyone asks for these in jobs. English gets a little bit of a spike because people need to hire English teachers, and for some writing jobs, English is seen as relevant. But again, it's a tiny fraction of what's above. And history, which is actually one of the great all-purpose majors that can take you anywhere, is hardly ever asked for. So this is a blind spot on employers' part, but it does mean that if you're going through job ads looking to put your major to work, you're probably approaching the job market in the wrong way, or in a way that's going to be much more frustrating than some of the other paths that we'll talk about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is a classic campus job fair, and I use it as a metaphor for what's also available online now. I mean, obviously, schools are not clustering people in that close, and this is a pre-mask photo. But if you're seeing a job ad that looks interesting, we find at LinkedIn that some of our ads get 900 applications. And that's slightly terrifying on both sides of the process. For us as employers, it means we really cannot read all 900 of them. And we're at the mercy of looking for keywords and trying to bring it down to a list of 50 or so that we will read closely. And that's unfortunate. That's unfair to the 850 resumes and job applications that we never really look at. I don't know that we've got a choice, though. I mean, we would seize to a halt if we spent, 20 minutes reviewing each candidate, multiply it out, and that's, months of productive time that gets lost. So that's unfortunate, and you don't want to be in that race. You don't want to try and be candidate number one in a race of 900 people where there is no silver medal for candidate 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then that brings the question of, okay, what are the alternatives? And so let's go to the next slide. So this pulls out some of the examples in the book, You Can Do Anything. And I'll take you through them in a little bit of narrative. And the headline point is that it takes ingenuity to jump that queue, to figure out how you can get to the job that you want without having to go through that 900-person deep application queue, or without having to work the crowd in one of those job fair type settings where in the end, all they want are the engineers, the accounting majors, the computer science majors. So Milan Garcia has a wonderful story. She is a sociology major from Berkeley, or she was some years ago. And she has ended up first as the chief digital liaison for the city of Oakland, California. And her big job there was to figure out how to get underrepresented people or people without state-of-the-art technology to still participate in what Oakland could offer in the way of digital tools. So whether that's jury duty, whether that's reporting a pothole, whether that's writing a letter to your mayor, all the things that you interact with in a city, if you've got high-speed bandwidth and your own devices, you're fine. If you've got an older phone, if you've got a plan that requires you to pay by the minute, if you don't have any technology and you're at the mercy of whatever you can find in the public library, the city of Oakland should not be freezing you out from your ability to interact with it. So she was the person who was the advocate for how can we build this so that there's a simpler version that's available in the library? How can we make services available to everyone? It's a great job. It's a vital job. It's paying close to 6 figures. She did not get it because Oakland knew that was what they wanted. They'd actually posted a different job, and she went in when she did her initial job approach and took a less interesting job, got the interview, and said, you know what, here's what you really should be doing. And they basically rewrote her job description. I bring this up for 2 reasons. One, it's a nice marker that you don't always just have to be a taker of what's there. You can be an idea generator. You need to get the meeting with the right person, but come into interviews with the approach of how can you sell yourself? How can you create a more interesting job? And you might be able to do it on day one, or you might be able to talk people into building something more interesting 6 months down the road. The other thing, and there's a lot of research on this, there's a gender difference. Guys will apply for jobs where they have 60 or 70% of the credentials needed and will try and talk their way into delivering everything else. Women tend to be much more inclined only to apply when they match 100% of the requirements. And there's no reason that should happen. Female candidates' ability to skill up is every bit as considerable as male candidates. I mean, we can probably come up with lots of examples where the fastest learners have 2X chromosomes. And I would just say, don't regard the formal job application as a complete limit or a stricture or boundaries that limit what you can do. Think of ways that your creativity and your experience can open the door wider. So the second one example, very much in the spirit of service, comes from Ame Eubanks Davis. She was a history major at Mount Holyoke. She ended up going to work for Teach for America, doing the classic 2-year experience in a school with high needs, and then coming into TFA institutionally. And she was working at various vice president levels and began to notice that a lot of the people who were graduating from TFA schools had good grades, went on to solid colleges, did well academically, but had a terrible time starting their careers afterward. And they lacked the social capital, the network, the connections, the ability to work the crowd that were going to be essential to having a successful career. So she pulled out of TFA and built her own company called Braven, which does very hands-on coaching of high-achieving students of color at leading state universities and helps them figure out the social capital part of the game. So I offer her story, one, as a reminder that sometimes you may find your ultimate calling on a series of adjustments and zigzags and movements, and that also don't be afraid to think about founding your own business. If the world doesn't yet do what you want it to do, you can be the person who starts it. I was told at the beginning that there might be a lot of people who are considering careers in public health. That's actually an area I don't know well at all. David Whalen is someone I know socially who turned an economics degree into a vice president's position at one of the leading hospital chains. The one thing that's interesting about his career is he detoured into journalism for a couple of years, and that enabled him to build up a set of contacts and a network that made him a much more interesting candidate as he kind of went and got his master's in public health and as he built his career out of there. I want to pause for a little bit. I've thrown a lot of material at you. If there's anything that people would want to join in the conversation now and ask about, here's how I'm trying to get recognized in a field, here's what I see when I look at job ads, this is a great time to take a couple questions and to have a little bit of a group conversation about it. So I'm going to sit still and look at the chat message box, and hopefully you'll have a question or two that can help us turn this into a conversation. So Diana, you're at a 3.8. I think you're our highest person on the score. If you can share in the chat a little bit about where you're going, that would be great. And anyone who's at a 2, as I said, there are no wrong answers. If you're at a 2 and still trying to figure out what's my field, who do I even want to talk to, how do I do it? Oh, that's great. So from Hadlia Cummins, I am graduating a semester early. When's a good time to apply for jobs? Is it more effective to apply for entry-level jobs? I'm a big believer in applying off-cycle. I graduated in March and ended up getting a job at the Wall Street Journal, not because I was amazingly qualified, but because someone had just quit to play pro basketball in Puerto Rico, and they had an opening, and it was unexpected, and my letter showed up like the day after. If I'd written a week earlier, the opening wouldn't have existed, and if I'd written a week later, it would have been filled. So yeah, I think this applying off cycle is a big advantage. And you know, you're going to have a cascading series of opportunities. There are really well organized places that tend to know what they want 6 months out. There are places that are much more ad hoc that will have openings suddenly. And I would say the bigger organizations tend to move slower and more deliberately. The smaller ones tend to move faster and a little more impulsively. So time your applications that way. If you're you know, looking 3 or 4 months ahead of time, look for the bigger places. If you're wanting something next week, look for the smaller ones. On applying for entry-level jobs, I'm going to talk a bit about project work quite soon, and I think you don't want to get stuck in a job that does not have a promotion track. But at the same time, there are some opportunities that are deliberately short-term that give you a chance to get a foot in the door, and we'll go there in a moment. Okay, so next question. They're coming fast. I like this, and I'll try and keep up with them. Is attaining a job more about securing the right connections or building your professional and personal competencies? It's got to be both. And in a way, you can't do it with just one of those. You can be marvelously connected, but if you have no skills, people are going to say, gee, I wish I could help you, but I can't. And if you have superb professional competencies, but you aren't connected, it's just hard to get noticed. So I would put equal time into both of those. They each matter, and when you can pull them together, then you're in great shape. Great. So Diana, your update on federal positions at the State Department is great. That is one of the most structured hiring processes. And if I remember right, the Foreign Service exam is something that really recognizes people with bright and curious, inquisitive minds who are really well informed, and there's a willingness to work with people and stretch them. So yeah, it's great that you've identified that as an opportunity. I do remember when I did You Can Do Anything, one of the stories involved a Binghamton grad who kept knocking on at the State Department for opportunities, ended up taking a 6-week appointment on the Cuba desk. He actually had no Spanish. It was a position that he was uniquely unqualified for. He was fairly far down learning Farsi. There's all kinds of things he could have done for the Mideast team, but that was where the opening was. And I think that willingness to jump into wherever it is. And then once he got to the State Department, he made a point of getting to know the human relations specialists, chatting them up, asking them where else openings would be. And they did a good job of pointing him to projects that ran more than 6 weeks. So I would say if you take something that's a little below your skill level, use it as an opportunity to make friends, get to know people in the organization. If there is a physical presence, have a lunch strategy. Think about the people you want to invite out for lunch or coffee, even if it's all virtual. Don't be hesitant about pinging people and saying you saw something interesting in their bio or you heard good things about them. Do they have a few minutes for an informational interview or to tell you how their career unfolded? I'm jumping ahead to some of the content we'll get to later, but that willingness to reach out and make new friends can often get you accelerating within an organization. Let me pick up on another question. How much of a reach would be appropriate when applying for jobs you're not qualified for? And someone mentioned that 25% of the workforce is retiring. It's easier to shoot high and have people move you down a level. Sometimes there is an assistant position that isn't yet advertised, and they'll tell you you're not ready for the big job, but you might be ready for the assistant one. Do apply for things that you're likely to be able to get a conversation with some, and apply as a warm lead rather than as a cold one. Yes, if you can't apply to be ambassador to France and expect to get much of a consideration, but I would encourage you to stretch a little bit, and then also just to follow up with emails, notes, and if this doesn't work, what else could you offer me? And be that person who's pleasantly persistent and trying to open doors as best you can. Okay, there's a question about gap years before grad school. What types of jobs should we pursue? If you're fairly confident that you're getting into law school, this is a great time to stretch your horizons. In fact, let me pop over to the next slide, and there's I think something that's kind of fun there. Okay, so this is a piece I did for LinkedIn a couple months ago where I talked about the value of seminars in college, just because you learn to have that discussion back and forth and to have a meeting of minds, and how almost no matter what the subject, that's going to be of value to you in the world of work. And lo and behold, people add in their own comments. My favorite one is the one that's bubbled in green. The most useful class I ever took was Blood Feuds about medieval Iceland. Seriously, and this is from attorney David Saperstein. And I like it because on the one hand, what in the world does medieval Iceland have to do with a career as a 21st century lawyer? And the answer is because people argue, and people have argued forever. And there's something about a stylized community that's taken argument to a high level that can teach you a lot of stuff. So if the question before us is, what's the advantage of a gap year? I would say go out and do things that stretch your mind in directions that might ultimately help you as a lawyer 10 or 15 years from now. But rather than working as a paralegal and learning how to stamp forms, there's plenty of time to learn that later. Go out and work with the kind of community that you want to serve. Think about doing something abroad. Think about doing something that will just stretch you as a person. And the nice thing about law school is it's admission that's predominantly driven by grades and scores. So you don't have to worry about shining up your admissions credentials all that much more. The one downside of law is you can spend an awful lot of time moving paper behind a desk, and use this as a chance to do something else too. Question from Nitan. Is there a minimum threshold of connections within our field that we should try to reach in order to land jobs? All you really need is one super useful connection, but you don't know when that one happens until you reach out further. And probably the answer is you'll have people who will lead you to other people, and it'll start to become an ecosystem. And as you become known among multiple people, you'll have more advocates for you, looking for you. I would say 10 to 20 solid connections is a great place to be. You can probably still get something accomplished with 3 or 4. But I know when I've written books, I've found that there's the old 80-20 rule, and I would take it to 90-10. 10% of the people I interview provide me with 90% of the value of what I get. And everyone else contributes a little on the edge. But I would think as much of, am I getting the most out of my best connections? And if someone was already helpful, am I sending them thank you notes afterward, telling them how I benefited from what they did, and then making an additional ask that they're likely to say yes to? So go deep as much as you go broad. Bennett had asked, any tips on reaching out to people and organizations you don't have any personal relationships with? We will get there in about 10 or 15 minutes, and I've got a bunch of stuff for you. And you'd asked about cold calling. Anytime you can come in with the faintest of an introduction or connection, that improves your odds. Raw cold calling can still work, but I would say there's a lot to be gained for figuring out how can you come in with a little bit of an intro. Thank you, Diana, about stretching your mind. And Diana, if you want to turn your microphone on and share something about the jobs you've done, let's live up to interactive and not just rely on chat, but also use the full capabilities here.
Sure. I'd love to, definitely. I mean, I could start off by saying that I think that I'm not in a unique position in saying that a lot of us young students, with a certain amount of confidence, I can say that most of us might not be doing exactly what we planned on doing this summer. We aren't doing exactly what we planned on doing in the spring. It has impacted us students significantly in our professional and academic development endeavors. So right now, what I'm actually really, really excited to be a part of is that I'm interning with the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia. I'm a Philadelphia resident, so what I'm doing at the moment is contributing to a series of newsletters titled The Color of Inequality. So writing about, like different economic indicators for systemic racism. And this is something that happened and something that I applied for literally on Handshake. A lot of us might be on Handshake. It's a resource that colleges, tend to give us to use.
It's a very strong system, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a fan. I don't have like a very large successful success rate with them, but it is really just a matter of continuing to write those cover letters and be rejected, and sometimes we actually receive offers. But this opportunity came, after the huge disappointment that an internship with the State Department was canceled for me this summer, even though I had gotten a conditional offer. So, I mean, certainly I could have tried to take a job with Amazon. I could have tried to take a job with, some other business that was still open. But at this particular moment, this experience that I got is really, really meaningful. And it gives me something to talk about. And I think in general, with your, employment profile, it's all about the narrative that you can write. So if, at least for me personally, in my limited experience, taking a job that actually gives me that meaningful thing to talk about, even though it pays less, is better in the long run, especially for us in the liberal arts.
Yeah, I really like all the points you've made. I'd also underscore that at a smaller organization, there is room to do a lot of things. And as you work on that project, you may want to ask, what other projects do you guys have going? Who are some of your funders who are, learn as much as you can about their ecosystem. And you may find that not only do they give you interesting work, but they can be a springboard to your next situation.
Thank you.
Right. So we had a question about applying to research institutions before doing an MD, PhD program, and they're looking for specific lab skills. Let's think about how you can sort of backdoor your way in. Are there places that are short on funding or understaffed that have fewer applicants and are more likely to relax their rules? I'm trying to think if there are, okay, so in medicine, there's no end of rural hospitals that need ER doctors and have more relaxed qualifications. I mean, you still need an MD, but if you are wanting to be a ER doctor in one of the big Boston teaching hospitals, they'll pick you over forever on your credentials. If you're wanting to be an ER doctor in Lake Village, Arkansas, they are thrilled that you are certified as a doctor in any form and glad to have you. Are there places where you can learn the lab skills and they will skill you up where it's still a good enough lab to be in, but instead of going for the R1 universities, you find somewhere that's still running a lab, but is a little less prestigious, work there for 6 months, and then use that as a jump off point to go for your bigger one. I'm a little bit hazier on this than I would be on using that same strategy in some other industries I know better, but there's usually some point of entry where the competition is less fierce and where you can get some more on-the-job training. Marketing study abroad experience. Those make for absolutely great stories in personal interviews. And the other thing, I mean, we'll jump ahead, but it's too good not to share. If you worked in an unusual country, I'm going to tell you about the value of doing alumni connections in a little bit. And look for alumni who have been in that particular country too. I had a chat once with someone who had worked in Mauritius, and we just sat down and pulled up all the people in the industry he wanted to work in who'd either done Peace Corps work in Mauritius or had run hotels in Mauritius or what have you. I can guarantee you that if you get a note saying, I worked in the country that you spent 2 years of your life, you're going to get a reply rate that's like 10 times higher than anything else. And we'll do a little bit in a few minutes of how to play around with LinkedIn and find those people. But if you've got study abroad experience already, look for people who appreciate that particular country and then try and make them your new best friends. Super. Well, that was everything I hoped our question break would be. We're going to do more of those. Let me just march through a few more of the slides and hopefully we'll have some more content that's useful to you. So off to the next slide. Okay, so now that I've told you where employers always are, the answer is, as many of you have started to flag, we're in a world now with really high unemployment. Hopefully this is temporary. Hopefully it's coming down, but right now it is where it is. So 3 areas for us to explore: who's still hiring. Second, which we've started to talk about, which is the value of project work as a foot in the door. And then the third is what I refer to as hidden jobs, which we sort of circled in on a couple times, but this time we're really going to put it right in the center of our focus. So we can head into the next slide. So we at LinkedIn sat down, we did a big graduate's guide to the workforce that came out a couple weeks ago. We looked through the top 5 industries with the most open jobs now. Healthcare almost always shows up as the #1 item in any search. It's just a constantly growing field. And coming back to the lab question, I would wonder, are there labs within some aspect of healthcare? I mean, hopefully more than the local blood bank, but somewhere where you are going to work with instruments and pipettes and titration and measurement and what have you, and build up some of the skills. That would be one to look for. Retail still shows high here. I'm a little puzzled because so many stores are closed, but some of that may be online. Some of that may be in areas of retail I hadn't thought about. Transportation and logistics, recreation and travel, software and IT. This is obviously a group that's much more committed toward public service, which is terrific. I am not encouraging you to sell out and go do corporate stuff. If you feel the calling to do more to help the world, please don't let go of that. But if you're looking for somewhere that will pay the bills for 6 months while you get ready for the people you really want to hire, that's our checklist. So let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk a bit about project work. We do a survey every 2 weeks of how people at different stages of work are feeling. And the key is a little bit complicated, but the line at the bottom that never goes anywhere is people who are unemployed, who are understandably quite frustrated. The thick line at the top is our overall US public. The dotted line that starts to pick up from the floor is freelancers. And that's what I want to talk about, because there's a lot of short-term project work that completely shut down in April and May and is starting to come back. And as the quote off to the side goes, there are a bunch of employers who know that they've got business now. They're not sure how long it's going to last. And they're much more comfortable paying notionally $50 an hour for a freelancer to do some writing, some design, some editing, some research, whatever, than they would be hiring someone at the equivalent of $30 or $35 an hour in a full-time job, where they have to onboard them and make at least an implicit promise that the job will stay. So the downside is, if you get to the end of the contract and they don't have more work, you don't have an immediate next destination. The upside, as the guy says, is if work continues, you can stay in that freelancer role. You can use it to build up your portfolio, and you can use it to build up your connections. So the listing and advertising market for short-term project work is much more erratic than the formal job posting thing. You'll see some of that on Indeed and LinkedIn and other places that run job ads, but a lot of it is word of mouth. You'll see some things on Upwork that can be turned into something bigger and better. And I can't officially tell you to grab listings on Upwork and then go call the employers and say, hey, here's what I really want to do. But that is certainly a path that is open. Craigslist is very heavily loaded with things that no one needs a college degree to do, and I wouldn't encourage you to spend that much energy on it. But there are still, that's also the kind of word of mouth thing. When you do outreach to people in your network, they may know of short cycle projects, and I would put that in as part of your strategy of how to stay current in your field, get some income. And yes, if you can land the perfect full-time job, that's great. But if not, you're doing the equivalent of 6 weeks on the Cuba desk, and it helps get you ready for something else. So this is a constant refrain of mine, and I can't do a talk without putting up this slide. So when you think about what do we really offer, we offer these 3 things: curiosity, creativity, and empathy. I've always made empathy the biggest one, because I think that ability to understand other people and connect with them is distinctive for all of us, but particularly for liberal arts graduates. And I would say that right now, given the public events that we've had to work through the last month, I'm seeing a big change in corporate response, and really in, government, cities, nonprofits everywhere. We need to think harder about how we function harmoniously as a society. So I would look for ways that people are starting community outreach efforts, that people are looking to do more work where empathy is the center of the job, and try and strike up conversations with people in your network, establishing that you've got something you can contribute here. I don't think the ads will explicitly ask for empathy, but I think there are a lot of desire to be more effective in this area, and that may be a way that you can figure out how to turn that desire into the right job for you. Next slide. And then this is, again, a favorite slide of mine. This is a National Bureau of Economic Research study. 42% of jobs are filled without any trace of a job ad. They analyze month by month, and it's the equivalent of jumping over the fence. So this is where networking really pays off. I mean, networking can help you for an introduction to an enlisted job, but what it can really help you is getting the people who are 2 months away from putting up that listing, who meet you and they go, you know what, we don't need to list this job, we just want to hire you. So that is really your payoff for networking. It helps you get over those kinds of fences. And let me ask, is there anyone here who feels that they've had a good networking experience that could accomplish that for you? And if so, can you type in the chat a little bit and just share with us either here's the way my networking's already working, or here's the area where I'd like to network, and can you help me make that happen? Because we can then use the next few minutes of this conversation to share some tips about how to achieve that in your own searches. Particularly, okay, so Wasik, I've never used LinkedIn. I'm way behind on it. Everything's been in person and just one-to-one authenticity. One-to-one authenticity is great. I mean, in a way, you're getting to the goal line. You don't have to work your way past all of the intermediate steps. But where you're trying to think, how do I meet more people? In fact, we can probably roll in a couple slides. I think we've got some that we'll speak to. We'll go to the next slide now. So this is, again, a common point for me. Research your opportunities, spend time meeting people, and ship resumes at the end. Don't regard your job hunt as 80% shipping resumes. That's actually one of the last steps, and that's when you've got someone who's very much in step with what you want to do. And I think if we hop one more slide ahead, we'll get to one that I'm ready to talk on a little more. Now, okay, so we're going to go into networking in the age of COVID. I'll have a thought for you on geography, and then I'll have a thought for you on Zoom. So let's go into networking, because that's kind of where we want to be. Okay, so here's the big thought. Wherever you went to school, you've got alumni who are ready to work on your behalf. Use LinkedIn, type in the name of your school in the search field, go to that page. When you get there, on the left-hand side, you'll see an alumni connection thing. Click on the alumni connection thing. You'll start to see a whole lot of metrics where you can sort by graduation year. You can see people who've graduated within the last 5 years. You can see people by what industry they're working in. You can see people by what major they had. You can triple filter and search for all of these things. And then once those people start to come up, send them notes. Just say, hi, I'm a graduate of the same school, and I'm looking to build my career. It sounds like you've done interesting things in your field. I'd love to hear about how you did it and any advice you have for me. In that first note, you're much better asking them to recount their story and share some advice. People like to share advice. If you go, I'm looking to get hired, find me a job, that feels a little bit too fast, a little presumptive. They need to like you first. They need to feel some kinship to you. But once you can establish that, then they are probably going to, on their own, reach out and look for ways to help you. And particularly with a group like this where you're at academic standouts, that's going to register strongly. And the fact that you've got interesting ambitions that may relate to their field, that's going to register strongly. Great, so I'm looking at Saman's note on, yes, befriending students who were seniors when I was a freshman. They're coming up in their career field, starting businesses and giving advice and collect connections along the way. One of the things that I think is really valuable is to reach out to recent alumni. And in fact, one of the things that schools do, because so much of alumni relations is handled by the development office, they're looking for the people who are 20 or 30 years out and can write big checks. It's nice that they can write big checks, but that population isn't really going to know how to get started in the job market. Their information may be a little out of date, or they're functioning at the vice president, deputy mayor, sort of, senior policymaker level. That's not really where you are. The people who have just gotten in the door themselves are going to be the best ones to make friends with. They'll have more time. They'll be less bombarded by people. They'll be kind of flattered that someone sees them as an expert. And I think that opportunity to share their journey with you and then to offer some introductions and contacts will start to get you to that place where you've got warm leads. And the nice thing is this works just as well in an age where we're all on Zoom as it does in the age where we can meet face to face. You can get a lot done by email and by these kind of calls. Great, so we'll pop ahead a slide. I'd want to talk a little bit about geography. And I think there's always been the assumption that you need to move to where the jobs are. And every spring we see a big migration into New York City and an earliest big one into Washington, DC, and pretty sizable ones into Chicago and San Francisco and LA. And those 5 cities pull a huge number of recent grads, particularly the people who are most ambitious. And now we're in this interesting stage where if a lot of places are not physically open for business, you can work in a city that can be very different than where you live. And that then brings the question of, particularly if we're in a turbulent economy, do you want to be paying $2,000 or $3,000 a month in rent for a place that may be surprisingly small and not quite the neighborhood you wanted to be in? And do you really need to be in the big five cities, particularly New York and San Francisco, but to some extent, Washington, Chicago, LA as well? Do you need to be spending a huge amount on rent there in order to be relevant to that job market? I don't totally know the answer. What I've put up here is a chart where we looked at typical earnings for the kinds of first jobs that ambitious college students would be getting. And that takes us into product manager, teacher, a bunch of other business analyst, the kinds of jobs where you go, okay, that's why I went to college. And we look at what the earnings are, and then we look at what % of your money would go for rent. And what you see is a ton of Midwestern cities, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and so on, all of which have much lower cost of living than if you start to head into the high-cost coastal cities. So, in fact, okay, just a second, I'll get to Diana's question, which I do like. I don't totally know the answer yet, whether you can sustain a coastal career while still living in a Midwestern city, but I think it's worth thinking about, and especially if you have family somewhere between the coasts and it's easier to work out your housing, tapping into what family has. I think your opportunities to find good remote work and avoid paying a lot of rent in a city that's not yet ready to sponsor you could be considerable. So I open that up as an area for conversation. Okay, Diana's question. I'd like to hear more about points to keep in mind about the project management skill set. So let me tell you a story first. When I joined LinkedIn, we had a bunch of project managers who would make sure that new features and new initiatives got launched, and they didn't really write the computer code, someone else did that. They didn't really do the design, someone else did that. They didn't do the user testing, someone else did that. But they were the glue that held it all together. And they set the schedules, they made sure the specifications were right. They used some mixture of deadlines and friendship and cajoling and discipline to make sure everyone stayed on track. And there was one guy who was really quite good at this and a very engaging personality and a marvelous presenter. A big part of these jobs are being able to present to a group and explain what you want. And I went up to Jasper and said, hey, tell me your story. And he goes, I'm an English major from Yale. And I go, well, that's interesting. And I go, how did you learn this? He says, actually, the thing that helped me the most is right after college, I spent 2 years doing bicycle tours for rich people through castles in France. And he said, I learned more about getting tipsy, wealthy adults on and off their bikes and making sure they didn't overstay their time. And that has been central and relevant to me in terms of trying to get all of the engineers and designers and everyone else of LinkedIn. And I could not think of a better way to train for it. And Jasper was a funny guy, so he was making the point where, seriously, in terms of the skills that you really need, the core skills are the kinds of things that if you've worked at a campus club, if you've led any kind of events or produced a play, you are a huge step down the road on that. There is some official nomenclature and jargon, and there's actually a BYU How to Be a Project Manager online course that, I don't know, costs $500 or whatever. And I know BYU course, everything in your $190,000 Bowdoin education will make you good at it, but the $500 online course will also teach you the jargon. I'm hesitant to recommend that specific course without having gone through it, but I would mark this as an area where if you're good at getting things done and you like working with people and kind of bringing things to the finish line and making them excellent and effective and on time, a fast-growing area, you'll see it in nonprofits, you'll see it in civic-minded groups, you'll see it in business. The liberal arts majors can thrive, and whatever you've done that's the equivalent of getting people on and off their bikes in the Loire Valley is going to be highly relevant to it. You'll need to meet the right people to tell your story to, but you will find people who are kindred spirits who appreciate what you've done. Okay, we got a couple more slides, and then I want to open it up for any concluding questions. Oh, I want to spend a few moments on Zoom. And I realize as someone who comes from the pre-Zoom generation, it's presumptuous of me to tell you how to do Zoom. You probably have better instincts on this than I do. But at the same time, it's evolving. And I'm noticing, differences in everything from how we sign off and wave to when we go on mute, when we don't go on mute, how we use chat. Spend a little time thinking of your video conference presence as a skill in its own right. Our director of photography at LinkedIn put up this short video, and I'll make sure that Anne and Nora get the link. It's 3 minutes that just take you through screen positioning, lighting, background, microphone, headphones, that kind of thing. And you'll look at it and you go, 80% of it is, yeah, I know that, I know that, I know that. And then somewhere along the way, you'll see something where you go, oh, that's actually something I should be doing too. So like it or not, this is our new main way of communicating. And there's no reason with just a little bit of work, you can't end up with the ability to project your best self, even through video conferencing. And that is worth taking a little time to make sure that you're not just going in with an A- video conferencing game, but you're going in with your very best one. So that is a very tactical, technical note to end on, so I don't really want to end there. But I want to wrap up the formal presentation with this. And then if we've got any questions about areas that I've covered or any particular challenges that you're facing that you'd like a few words of advice, or simplest thing of all, I've got a network. It's not a bad network. If there are things you want my network to do for you, cut loose, make an ask, and I will do my best to say yes to as many of you as possible. And feel free to turn on your microphone if you want, and we can do this in regular conversation. Robert and Darren, I see you guys moving. Is this a prelude to having a question? And if so, I'd love it if either of you went first.
It's just a shifting of the chair.
That's allowed. Darren, tell me a little what where you went to school and what you're looking to accomplish.
I go to school at Williams. I study math and history. I joke usually what I study is a mystery. And I guess I'll tell you what I'm doing this summer. Originally, I had an internship at the federal government lined up, but like a lot of people have experienced, it fell through. But I moonlight as an abstract mathematician. I was lucky enough to be given an NSF position to just research pure math. So a real detour.
That's spectacular. Are you at the stage where you can publish anything formally, or whether you even have some problems that you're looking at that lay people would be able to understand and appreciate?
I think I'm lucky in that I work in knot theory and it's just unusually visual. So if I had 15 minutes on a plane, I could definitely play around with some fun problems, but it takes a little bit more time than that.
Are you on Quora by any chance?
No, I'm not.
Do you know Quora?
Yeah, I do know Quora.
So in my idle time, I somehow ended up being a Quora top writer for 4 or 5 years. It is a wonderful platform to share knowledge in any direction. I don't know if they have a knot theory expert yet, and I would love to see someone explain knot theory well. There's a guy who worked for NASA who provided easily 100 answers on every aspect of the space program. There's an Israeli mathematician who riffs on number theory. So I'm suggesting this partly as a way to, benefit the rest of us, but also it feels like the kind of field that's semi-accessible. We won't fully understand it, but we'll be able to catch glimpses. And if you've got a little visibility there, it probably takes like 20 minutes to answer a question and answer 3 or 4, and you'll become a minor god on Quora. It is a great way for people to know that you are a thinking person and for serendipity to happen. You'll get inbound from that. You'll get questions, you'll get comments, you'll get upvotes. And I would just see that as a way of getting recognition. And there may be people who dabbled in knot theory themselves who now are working in interesting places and can introduce you to opportunities. But one of the sayings that our editor-in-chief at LinkedIn has is publishing is the new resume. And particularly if you're in a field where the ideas are interesting and where they spark conversation, starting to be seen as a thinker is a great way to attract attention of people who can help you and who can open doors for you. So that's what I'd offer you.
I'm much obliged to your ability to tie it back to something relevant.
And I love the line about mystery. I'm going to borrow that. That will get shared somewhere. Anyone else? Yes, Wasi.
You have a question about how do you convey specific like passions, say like artistic abilities and whatnot, combined with your professional experience, either like in interviews, resume, and whatnot. So I'm a spoken word artist, and so I do a lot of videos and poetry and compete in slams and whatnot. But then I also am passionate about like minority civic engagement, and I'm a political science major, and so I have a lot of like background in community organizing and activism, and I find a lot of intersections like in my community work that I do, but then I guess conveying that professionally. Do you have any advice regarding that?
So let's take it one piece at a time. That's a terrific mosaic of skills. If you're doing slams, do you have any video of your stuff up on social media somewhere?
Yeah, a lot.
I would think so. Where have you been getting your best engagement?
Instagram and Twitter. Facebook is kind of like slower. I actually let go of YouTube because people don't click on links on social media to go to YouTube. Like you just have to post on that social media platform.
So what's the best engagement you've gotten out of Twitter? I'm asking this for a reason. I'm just curious.
I performed for Sean King one time, and I think
Whoa.
I got like, I think that was like the most views I had. I think it was like over 10K or so on Twitter.
So views is interesting, but in my own Twitter experience, I found every now and then there's someone amazing who just somehow finds my stuff on Twitter and then good things happen. So I actually got an invitation to do a commencement speech at Washington and Jefferson University. They're in purple state territory, right on the border between blue and red. And they needed a commencement speaker who wouldn't be booed out of town. So I was a relatively safe guy. And the president actually reached out to me after I'd done the book and said, hey, I got a commencement slot coming up. You'd be an interesting person. Can you DM me? And I did. And the next thing I know, I'm there in a gown. And it was quite astonishing.
Wow.
I bring this up because I think Twitter actually can make that kind of thing happen. So when you're putting up your slams there, are you also putting up some of your thoughts on community activism and trying to be seen as a person with a foot in both worlds?
Yeah, for sure. Most definitely. I think because it's a personal account, I'm able to use that to a maximum and show both worlds. So yeah.
So are you being strategic about who you follow on the hope that they follow you back?
I don't really care about follow back necessarily. I actually follow a lot more than I guess people follow me, just because I follow, countless amount of organizers and, academics and just people that I can just tune into. But
Okay,
they don't
so
follow. Yeah.
So I like what you're doing there. The hope is that they follow you back, start to see your feed and go, you know what, you're a talented guy who can make things happen. I want to talk to you about stuff. But I would think not just people who are putting up great content themselves, but people with really interesting jobs. And kind of, if you go through, here are the community organizers in 15 communities that I want to work in. And let me make sure that I have covered San Diego top to bottom, or that I have covered Philadelphia top to bottom, and see if you can use that as a very subtle submarine ping way of trying to get them to notice who you are. I can't guarantee that it'll work, but I could give you 3 more, like the commencement speech thing, where I go, you know what, even when I think I'm wasting my time on Twitter, I'm not wasting my time.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Sure. Yes, Elisa.
That's super helpful, and I wanted to know like what advice you have for those that are pretty like social media adverse. I don't have a Twitter nor an Instagram. I have been slowly trying to convince myself, because I also do not spoken word, but I do speeches, presentations regarding the rights of children and their system impacted children and their incarcerated parents. And so I've done a handful of speaking engagements, and I'm wondering how I can get more opportunities, but at the same time a little adverse like posting about it, or like creating a specific Twitter account to try and like gather followers or get that out there. So do you have any advice for someone like me who might go maybe like a non-traditional route of just building connections with within my community and maybe like a little bit beyond, and looking for those sorts of opportunities.
So this would be one case where I'd say, what if we take that same basic strategy, but do it all on LinkedIn instead of Twitter? I mean, LinkedIn has a higher level of civility. I mean, we will in fact talk that we want to keep the conversation respectful. I kind of think of us as the Canada of social media. We're not as big as the other guys, but we behave nicer. And we definitely have a community of people who are involved on children's issues, on social issues. Send me a connection request and I can give you a lot more detail in how to make sure that your content gets seen by the right people. And they are definitely in a position to hire. And if you've got some work that you can put up in your portfolio, then they're able to see that. Do you have even a start of a LinkedIn presence, or you haven't done our platform?
No, I have that LinkedIn is the only social-ish media that I approve of. So
Cool.
yeah, I do.
I would be happy to give you, and actually anyone here, a 20-minute consult of how to make your LinkedIn presence do everything you want it to do. And it seems like you've got a great body of work, and you've also got a clear audience, and we'll burn up too much time if we try and do it right now. But send me a note over the weekend. I'll send you back like 10 ideas of how to do it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure. Nitan, I see your thumb up, and it is not small. I got a call on you. What's up?
To be fair, Wazik also had claps. We both agreed with you that I think, speaking for Wazik, that I'd love to connect with you and kind of see how I could best optimize my LinkedIn.
Totally, yeah. And tell me a little about what you studied and what other activities you have and where you want to get to.
Sure. So I'm a rising senior in Rutgers University Camden. I triple major in economics, urban studies, and psychology. My passion is in homelessness and housing policy. So I worked at a local homeless shelter, connecting guests with different services to help them get out of homelessness, getting ID, connecting them with work, like with job opportunities, benefits. And then I also on campus facilitated a sleep out event where students slept outside to get a snapshot understanding of what it's like to sleep outside without a shelter. And so that through that, we were able to raise $6,000 for the shelter that I work at. And I also got some media involved.
That's impressive. That is great. If you haven't already posted an article or a summary about your sleep out event and the fact that it was a powerful fundraiser, that would be a great one to put up. And we can talk about some ways to make sure that people at the right types of organizations see that and start to think of you as a doer. So yeah, be glad to go there. One other simple thing on LinkedIn is if there are people who you regard as influential, follow them, and then if you see anything that they're posting, add a short comment, and it should be upbeat, but it doesn't have to be fawning or embarrassing. You can just say, you make some really good points, and I wanted to add something to the conversation. And then you can either discuss what you're doing or an extra insight you have about theirs. And they will start to see you as an interesting person, and you narrow the gap between the two of you. And that then becomes someone who may follow you or may engage with your content. And I can't guarantee it'll work every time, but you can make 50 of those outreaches, and if 3 of them come good, that's been time put to good use.
When you say influential, do you mean someone famous or just a trailblazer within the field?
Trailblazer within the field, or just someone who's an employer within the field. I mean, pick the 10 cities that you want to be in, and then figure out who's running the advocacy groups and the shelters and the whatever part of the city deals with homelessness issues, and whatever foundations are local. There's usually a couple sizable foundations in each city that care about such issues. And if you follow the program officers there and the CEO of the foundation, and there's usually some city government people, yeah, I mean, they do not need to be the kind of people that you'll see on TV tomorrow, but just the kind of people who help drive change and who will ultimately potentially have jobs that you'd be interested in.
Wonderful. I'm so glad I did the thumbs up. This is great.
Terrific. I think we're at time, but I'm hoping we have time for one last question if anyone has anything else. And then, of course, I'll renew my invitation. Reach out to me and connect, and we can have conversations via that channel too. Saman and Maria, I'm seeing you both nod your heads, and any flicker of body movement gets me reaching out to you. Do either of you have anything you want to bring up just to wrap up with us?
I've just sent you a connection on LinkedIn, and you have a great profile. We've done a few professional development workshops where we try to give people who we work with advice on how to make their LinkedIn profiles better. And yours is phenomenal. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, thank you. It didn't get there the easy way. I mean, there's I've often said I've got a pretty decent success profile, but I've also got a failure profile that goes at least as long. There are things I've tried that didn't work, but we'll save that for another conversation. And I guess the only point I want to make is don't get upset if there are a few stumbles along the way. That in the end, it will make you stronger. And if you're trying interesting stuff, you're going to go through life with like 60 or 70% success rate. But the things that work out well will carry you a long way. Great. So I think we really are at time. Thanks, Nora. Thanks, Anne. And particularly thanks everyone who's part of this program.
Oh, George, could I just interrupt you real quick? It looked like Maria was just about to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Maria. No, you absolutely have the floor.
Oh, I just wanted to say that my LinkedIn profile definitely does need work. So I'm very thankful that you gave us this presentation and that we could connect with you, and I'll reach out to you. So thank you.
Terrific. Glad to offer you some thoughts. So often people have done amazing stuff and they've just gotten trapped in resume language and they haven't figured out how to tell it. So we will do workshops every few months for people from community colleges who need help with it. The chance to do something similar for a group this talented is really going to be a highlight of this week. So count me in.
Well, George, I don't know how we can thank you enough. This was really a remarkable session. And I think it was so impactful to the students. I've been watching your face the whole time and just how much your talk has really resonated. So deeply appreciative. You've been a wonderful friend of Phi Beta Kappa, and we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Anne. I hope we can do this again next year. That's the best way of saying thank you, to let me come back again.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care, and everyone have a great weekend.
Okay, so everyone, we just have the link to the last session, and we'll do a wrap up. So we'll see you in a minute. Thank you again, George.
Thanks, George.
All right, take care.
Bye.